Jerusalem, roughly 520 years before Christ. A governor named Zerubbabel stands in the burned-out footprint of Solomon's temple, staring at 70 years of accumulated ash, shattered masonry, and charred timber. He holds a single foundation stone in his hand. The task ahead of him is architecturally impossible, stalled by local enemies and royal decree alike. But when the word of the Lord comes to the prophet Zechariah to address this massive construction delay, God does not speak to the rubble as a pile of rocks. Watch what the text does. God addresses the obstacle using the grammar of a living being. Why does the prophet look at a pile of ruined stones and speak to the delay, not as a what, but as a living, breathing who? An ancient entity standing directly in the path of the temple's foundation. Zechariah chapter 4, verse 7 inches, the King James Version reads, "Who art thou, O great mountain? Before Zerubbabel thou shalt become a plain, and he shall bring forth the headstone thereof with shoutings, crying, Grace, grace unto it." Stop right there. Picture it. The Babylonian Empire crushed this city a lifetime ago, dragging its people into the east. Now, a fragile remnant has crossed the river and returned to rebuild. But progress has frozen. Sabotage, political threats, and deep exhaustion have brought the work to a dead stop. To the natural eye, the obstacle is just a massive hill of debris and hostile neighbors, a mountain of dirt and politics. But the prophet looks at this blockage and says, "Who art thou, O great mountain? Not what are you? Not how will we clear this? Who?" There is an ancient Aramaic translation of the Hebrew prophets, called the Targum Jonathan, read aloud in the synagogues of the 1st century. It preserves how the ancient Jews understood this exact verse, long before modern readers reduced it to a mere metaphor for a difficult landscaping project. The Targum translates this mountain not as geology, but as a wicked, active kingdom, a foolish power, a principality. Read that again. The text forces us into a strange, unseen reality. The mountain blocking the governor is not made of limestone and dust. It has a personality. It has a will. It is standing in the exact spot where the Eben Bedil, the headstone, the chief stone of the new temple, is supposed to be laid. See the scene. Zerubbabel is holding a rock in his hands. The mountain is holding the territory. Two forces, trying to occupy the exact same geographic coordinate in the ruins of Mount Moriah. The governor is not just fighting a civic engineering problem. He is staring down a territorial authority that refuses to yield the ground it claimed during the 70 years of Jewish exile. Same soil, different war. If this mountain is a who, then we must look closer at what exactly is standing in the ash. To level a physical hill, you need oxen, carts, and men. To level a spiritual principality, holding the unseen rights to a ruined city, you need a weapon of an entirely different nature. We have a governor holding a single stone, staring down an invisible empire disguised as a construction delay. But the Hebrew text hides a secondary clue in the prophet's interrogation, revealing just how personal this standoff really is. What happens when we look at the exact Hebrew words Zechariah uses to challenge the darkness? Look down at the Hebrew scroll of Zechariah 4-7. The prophet records the voice of the Lord challenging the delay. "Who art thou, O great mountain?" Translate that English question back into the ancient Hebrew from which it was pulled. The phrase is mi ata. Hebrew makes a sharp, unbending distinction between persons and objects. If you are standing in a valley looking at a geological feature, a massive pile of rubble, or a sheer cliff face, and you want to ask, "What are you?" the phrase is ma ata. What is this thing? But Zechariah does not write ma ata. He writes, "Me, who?" Read that again. God is interrogating the dirt. He is speaking to a geographic obstacle using personal pronouns. He does not ask the mountain how tall it is, or what it is made of, or how much it weighs. He asks for its identity. Why? Because the ruined masonry scattered across Mount Moriah is not the actual mountain. The ash is just the physical manifestation of an invisible occupation. Picture it. The governor's hands are black with soot. The Eben, the solitary foundation stone, is heavy in his grip. He has been staring at a lifetime of uninterrupted decay. Every time his men try to clear the ground, they are paralyzed by threats, by letters sent to foreign kings, by a dark, oppressive dread that settles over the camp. The delay feels entirely unnatural, because it is. To understand who this mountain is, we must look at how the Hebrew prophets described empires. Turn the scroll back to Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 25. The Lord is pronouncing judgment on Babylon, the exact empire that burned this temple to the ground 70 years earlier. Listen to what he calls them. "Behold, I am against thee, O destroying mountain, saith the Lord, which destroyest all the earth." Stop right there. Babylon was built on a flat, sprawling plain in Mesopotamia. It had no literal mountains, yet God calls the empire a destroying mountain. In the ancient biblical cosmology, a mountain is not merely elevated terrain. A mountain is a seat of power. It is a throne. It is the high place where a principality rules and demands worship. Same imagery, same enemy. When Zerubbabel leads the captives back to Jerusalem, the physical empire of Babylon has already been conquered by Persia. The armies are dead, but the unseen principality that drove Babylon, the destroying mountain, has not abandoned the Temple Mount. It is squatting in the ruins. It is holding the territory. This changes the entire nature of the construction site. The governor is not managing a building project. He is engaged in an eviction. Miata, who are you? The mountain is a rival king, an ancient authority, refusing to yield the jurisdiction it held during the 70 years the Jews were in chains. It casts a shadow of fear over the workers, and this entity knows one terrifying fact. The moment Zerubbabel sets the Eben, the stone in his hand, into the dirt, the mountain's legal claim to the city is instantly revoked. The ground is deeply contested, but if this mountain is an active wicked power resisting the work from the unseen realm, then the history books should show us how that resistance manifested in the physical world. Who were the men actually standing in the ash, trying to stop the governor from dropping the stone? The scroll of Zechariah is unrolled on a wooden reading table in a first-century synagogue, but there is a quiet, historical crisis in the room. After 70 years of captivity in the East, the common Jewish people have forgotten how to speak their native Hebrew. They speak Aramaic, the language of the empire that enslaved them. To fix this gap, ancient scribes translated the sacred prophecies into spoken Aramaic paraphrases called the Targums. The Targum Jonathan to the prophets preserves exactly how the ancient world understood the dark entity standing in Zerubbabel's way, and it completely shatters the modern assumption of a literal geological hill. The King James text of Zechariah 4-7 asks the obstacle, "Who art thou, O great mountain?" But when the Aramaic reader spoke this exact verse aloud to the crowd, the Targum translated the challenge like this: "How are you accounted, O foolish kingdom, before Zerubbabel? Are you not as a plain?" Stop right there. A foolish kingdom. The ancient rabbis did not view this delay as topography. They viewed it as a sprawling, arrogant, geopolitical and spiritual machine. A kingdom. Sit with that. A kingdom has a king. A kingdom has borders and laws and a vested, violent interest in keeping its territory secure. When God speaks to the delay blocking the new temple, He is speaking to a rival kingdom that occupied the ruins of Mount Moriah. While the Jews were bleeding in the east, the unseen principality of Babylon did not die when the physical city fell to Persia. It simply relocated into the vacuum of Jerusalem, squatting in the ash. But notice the specific adjective the ancient Aramaic uses to describe it. Foolish. Why foolish? Because the principality holding the ruins is making a fatal miscalculation. It is looking at Zerubbabel, a tired, politically weak governor, leading a fractured, impoverished remnant, and it is confusing the man with the mandate. Picture the scene again. Zerubbabel is standing in the soot of his ancestors. He is holding the Eben, the solitary foundation stone. The mountain is looming over him, projecting an ancient, oppressive dread, convincing the workers the project is already dead. The foolish kingdom thinks this war is about masonry. It thinks if it can just stop the physical rock from touching the physical dirt, it retains its legal rights to the city. It does not realize the stone in the governor's hand is a spiritual eviction notice. I hold this as their telling, not as proven fact. But the Targum perfectly captures the dual nature of biblical warfare. The spiritual principality cannot physically slap the stone out of the governor's hand. It is a spirit. To stop a physical construction project, the invisible kingdom must hijack human systems to do the binding for it. Same soil, two different kingdoms fighting for the deed. The prophetic text gives us the unseen reality of the foolish kingdom. But a spiritual entity needs a physical shadow to enforce its will in the dirt. To stop the governor from laying the stone, the mountain had to find men willing to sign their names to the resistance. Who were the actual historical adversaries standing on the other side of the ash, demanding the work be abandoned? The spiritual war in the unseen realm always leaves physical fingerprints in the dirt. If the invisible mountain standing before Zerubbabel is an ancient, foolish kingdom, then we should be able to see its shadow moving across the historical record. Open the logs of the rebuilding. The book of Ezra captures the ground-level reality of the exact delay Zechariah is prophesying against. Ezra chapter 4, verse 1. The King James reads, "Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the children of the captivity builded the temple unto the Lord God of Israel, then they came to Zerubbabel and to the chief of the fathers, and said unto them, Let us build with you, for we seek your God, as ye do." Stop right there. The mountain does not immediately attack with swords. It approaches with a shovel. The unseen principality masking itself in the local tribes tries to secure joint custody of the altar. It wants a stake in the foundation. But Zerubbabel recognizes the infiltration and flatly refuses. He tells them they have nothing to do with the house of the Lord. And the moment the governor rejects the compromise, the physical mask slips, and the full weight of the mountain drops onto the construction site. Watch what the text does. Ezra 4, verses 4 and 5. "Then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah, and troubled them in building, and hired counselors against them, to frustrate their purpose. All the days of Cyrus king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius." Read that again. They hired counselors, they paid off politicians. The great mountain of Zechariah 4 is not a metaphor for a bad attitude. It is a highly funded, politically connected, multi-generational machine of sabotage. The unseen principality holding the ruins of Mount Moriah weaponizes the Persian court system to bury the temple before it can even leave the ground. Picture it. The remnant of Israel is hauling cedar and cutting stone under the brutal Middle Eastern sun. And standing at the edges of the site are the paid informants, the hired counselors of the adversaries, documenting every move, whispering threats, drafting legal injunctions to send back to the Persian king. Years pass. The delay stretches into decades. The work grinds to a devastating halt. Look closely at the specific physical target of the adversaries in Ezra 4:4. They weakened the hands of the people. Why the hands? Because the hands are holding the Eben, the stone. If the mountain can terrorize the men into dropping the masonry, if it can make the hands of the governor too heavy, too exhausted, too legally entangled to set the foundation plummet into the dirt, the unseen kingdom retains the territory. Sit with that. The warfare is deeply psychological. To defeat a physical army, you break their lines. To defeat a rebuilding remnant, you break their focus. You weaken their hands. You make the rubble look permanent. You convince them that the empire of Babylon may be historically dead, but its authority still rules the ash. Two realms, one construction site. The prophet Zechariah sees the invisible principality standing like a sheer cliff face. The historian Ezra records the hired lawyers and local warlords executing its will. But if this mountain is truly the lingering phantom of the Babylonian captivity, refusing to let the Jews reclaim their own capital, we have to ask how this unseen architecture actually works. How does an empire that has already been destroyed by God continue to project power over the people he just set free? Look at the map of the ancient Near East. The literal, physical city of Babylon sits 600 miles east of the ruins of Jerusalem. By the time Zechariah receives this vision, that physical city has already been conquered. The armies of Medo-Persia marched through its gates. The Babylonian king was slain in the night. The empire, as a political entity, is legally and historically dead. Yet the prophet is standing in Judea, staring at an invisible obstacle, and God is addressing the ghost of that exact same empire. How does a dead kingdom blockade a living remnant? We have to change how we define Babylon. Turn the pages of your Bible all the way to the end, to the scroll of Revelation. Long after the physical city in Mesopotamia was buried in desert sand, John the Revelator sees a dark, sprawling, spiritual empire dominating the kings of the earth. Revelation chapter 17, verse 5 inches, the King James reads, "And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth." Stop right there. Mystery, Babylon. The biblical text treats Babylon as an entity that survives its own physical destruction. It is not merely a geographic coordinate on the Euphrates River. It is an ancient architecture of rebellion, a principality. It was born at the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11, and it moves through history, inhabiting different systems, always seeking to centralize power and subjugate the people of God. Same spirit, different era. This is why the Targum called the mountain in Zechariah 4 a foolish kingdom. When the physical armies of Babylon burned Solomon's temple and dragged the Jews east, they created a massive spiritual vacuum in Jerusalem. For 70 years, the altars were cold. The Holy of Holies was an open-air crater. And into that geographic vacuum stepped the territorial principality of Babylon. It expanded its invisible borders. It claimed the ash. It set up its unseen throne directly over the foundation stones of Mount Moriah. Picture it. The Jews have returned home, but they are walking into a spiritual occupation. The empire they thought they left behind is waiting for them in the ruins. The mountain is the lingering dominion of their captivity. It is trying to convince Zerubbabel that the decree of the Persian king to rebuild is meaningless, because the spiritual jurisdiction still belongs to Babylon. It is projecting 70 years of trauma, 70 years of chains, directly onto the minds of the men holding the trowels. The physical adversaries we saw in Ezra, the hired counselors, the local political enemies are just the flesh and blood mechanisms of this ancient, lingering dread. The invisible kingdom is using them to enforce a spiritual border wall. It wants the Jews to physically inhabit Jerusalem, but spiritually remain in Babylon. I hold this as one reading, not the final word. But if you read the prophets carefully, you see this layered warfare everywhere. The battle for the dirt is always preceded by a battle in the heavenlies. Zerubbabel is holding the Eben, the solitary foundation stone. The mountain is holding the airspace. And a physical stone cannot crush a spiritual throne unless that stone carries a higher, divine jurisdiction. To understand exactly how a spiritual mountain of this magnitude is leveled, we have to look at how the most ancient Jewish apocalyptic texts describe the destruction of these unseen principalities. We have to look at the metal mountains. We have a dead empire ruling an empty city, refusing to let the governor lay a single block of masonry. But there is a visionary text, kept alive by the ancient church in the Ethiopian highlands, that reveals exactly what happens when these invisible thrones are confronted by the weight of heaven. What did the patriarch Enoch see standing in the high places, and why did they melt like wax? The psalmist sees it long before the governor stands in the ash. Psalm 97, verse 5 inches, the King James reads, "The hills melted like wax at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the Lord of the whole earth." Stop right there. Mountains melting like wax. It is a terrifying, violent image, but it is not a metaphor for volcanology or a shifting climate. To understand what is actually dissolving in the dirt of Jerusalem, we have to look at the exact nature of the thrones dominating the ancient skyline. First, Enoch, an ancient Jewish writing preserved whole in the Ethiopian Bible, records a vision of the unseen realm that completely shatters our modern view of geography. In a section called the Book of Parables, Enoch is caught up in a whirlwind. He looks down and sees 6 massive mountains standing over the earth. But they are not made of rock and soil. They are made of metal, iron, copper, silver, gold, soft metal, and lead. Read that again. Metal mountains. In the ancient mind, a metal mountain is an industrial, military throne. It is a principality holding court in the heavenlies, armed to the teeth, extracting worship and resources from the men below. Enoch watches in terror, but then he sees a figure arrive on the terrain, the elect one. And the moment this divine figure steps forward, the metal mountains begin to liquefy. I hold this as their telling, not as proven fact. But the ancient text explicitly states these mountains represent the powers of the fallen earth, the dominions of wicked authority. The angel tells Enoch they will melt like wax before a fire, so that no one shall be saved, either by gold or by silver. Same imagery, same war. Go back to the crater of Mount Moriah. God tells the unseen principality of Babylon in Zechariah 4:7. Before Zerubbabel thou shalt become a plain. The mountain is not going to be dug out with shovels. It is going to melt. It is going to collapse under the weight of a higher jurisdiction. The foolish kingdom that has been terrorizing the remnant, paying off counselors, and projecting dread over the construction site is about to hit its breaking point. Picture it. The governor is exhausted. His hands are weakened by decades of legal sabotage. He is standing at the exact coordinates of the Holy of Holies, staring at an invisible wall of copper and iron. The principality of Babylon thinks it is utterly immovable. It survived the fall of its physical city. It survived the decree of the Persian king. It is a metal mountain squatting on the promises of God. But God does not send an army to break the iron. He does not send a new king to fight the phantom of Babylon. He sends a single, highly specific object. Look closely at the Eben, the foundation stone resting in the governor's soot-stained hands. Because the Hebrew text is about to give us the exact metallurgical composition of the weapon that brings the Iron Mountain down. And it is not a sword. It is not a spear. It is a plummet. The iron throne of Babylon thinks it is indestructible, daring the governor to strike it with the weapons of men. But heaven does not answer with iron. It answers with the precise, devastating weight of divine measurement. What is the secret of the Eben Bedil, the strange tin plummet dropping into the dirt? Look down at the governor's hands. We have been watching him hold a stone since the first chapter of this history. But the prophet Zechariah forces us to look closer at the specific metallurgical makeup of the object swinging from his grip. Read Zechariah chapter 4, verse 10 inches, the King James. For who hath despised the day of small things? For they shall rejoice, and shall see the plummet in the hand of Zerubbabel with those 7. They are the eyes of the Lord, which run to and fro through the whole earth. Stop right there. The plummet. In English, a plummet is a basic construction tool. A piece of lead or metal on a string used by masons to find a perfect vertical line. But when you pull the English back into the ancient Hebrew, it was translated from. The text does not give us a generic tool. It gives us a highly specific composite object. The Hebrew phrase in the scroll is Eben Bedil. Eben is stone. We know this word. But Bedil is strange. Bedil is tin, a base metal, an alloy. Read that again. The weapon that brings down the great, invisible mountain of Babylon is a tin stone. Why tin? Why not gold, or iron, or bronze? To understand the gravity of the Eben Bedil, we must look at the root of the word itself. Bedil comes from the ancient Hebrew root badal. And badal is a terrifying word in the biblical text. It means to divide, to separate, to sever one thing from another entirely, with finality. It is the exact verb used in Genesis chapter 1, when God separates the light from the darkness. Same word, same power. Picture it. The spiritual mountain of Babylon is towering over the ash of Jerusalem. It is an architecture of chaos, a massive, foolish kingdom refusing to yield its 70-year claim. It looks at the tired governor and laughs at the day of small things. It sees a man with a frayed piece of string and a lump of cheap metal, but heaven sees a weapon of mass division. When Zerubbabel drops the Eben Bedil, he is not just checking if the foundation wall is straight. He is dropping a divine boundary line into the dirt. The tin stone is the physical anchor of a spiritual separation. The moment the string pulls taut, the battle takes effect. God is legally, permanently severing the holy coordinates of Mount Moriah from the chaotic jurisdiction of Babylon. I offer this as one reading, a study of the ancient language unlocking the scene. But the canonical text explicitly backs up the terrifying power of this small object. Look back at verse 10. Who is watching the plummet drop? Those 7. They are the eyes of the Lord, which run to and fro through the whole earth. Sit with that. The omniscience of God, the 7 eyes, are fixed entirely on the Eben Bedil. They are not looking at the Persian king. They are not looking at the hired counselors. They are not even looking at the terrifying size of the unseen mountain. Heaven's entire focus is localized on the exact geometric coordinate where the tin stone touches the ash. Because the moment the weight rests, the eviction is final. The mountain of iron melts. The invisible occupation shatters. Because it cannot withstand the exactness of the divine plumb line. The foolish kingdom is leveled to a plain. But clearing the airspace is only the first half of the mandate. A divided ground is an empty ground. To finish the war, the governor must replace the tin weight of separation with something entirely different, the final, crowning rock that seals the territory forever. We have seen the Eben Bedil divide the darkness, but what is the Eben HaRoshah, waiting in the wings? And why does its placement trigger a sound that echoes across the ruined city? Go back now to the crater of Mount Moriah, 520 years before Christ. The governor, standing in 70 years of accumulated ash. You have read this scene before. You thought it was just a man struggling with a stubborn building project, a pile of rocks, a hostile neighborhood. But tonight, you see the actual war. You see the foolish kingdom of the Targums, the invisible, iron mountain of Babylon, squatting over the airspace, projecting dread, paying off politicians, and holding the broken remnant hostage in their own capital. And you see the governor, exhausted but unyielding, holding the Eben Bedil, the tin stone, the divine weight of separation. The plummet drops, the string pulls taut. The jurisdiction of darkness is legally, fatally severed from the holy dirt. The mountain melts into a plain. But an empty foundation cannot stand against a roaming kingdom forever. The eviction must be sealed. Watch what the text does to finish the battle. Zechariah 4, verse 7, the second half of the prophecy. And he shall bring forth the headstone thereof with shoutings, crying, Grace, grace unto it. Stop right there. The headstone, the Eben Haroshah, the unseen mountain, is not defeated by swords, and the new temple is not crowned by military conquest. It is finished with a solitary stone accompanied by a deafening sound, a cry of grace, grace, in the Hebrew chen, chen, unmerited favor, absolute divine rescue. Why does the crowd scream grace at a rock? Because the men swinging the trowels know they did not win this war. They were outmatched, underfunded, and legally blockaded by the hired counselors of Ezra, chapter 4. If the battle had been fought on strictly earthly terms, the lingering shadow of Babylon would have crushed them into the soot, but the mountain fell. Because the Lord of the whole earth looked at the exact geography and decided to reclaim his house. The capstone is set, the shadow is broken. I offer this as one reading, not the final word. A way to look at the ancient prophets that honors the layered, invisible reality they actually lived in, instead of reducing their visions to mere poetic metaphors for landscaping. But the eviction leaves a lingering question. When the headstone is laid and the iron throne melts before the plummet of Zerubbabel, where does the principality go? The physical temple was finished, yes, but a spiritual entity does not cease to exist just because it loses its geographic claim. Where does a displaced, destroying mountain wander when the dirt is taken from it? The ash of Jerusalem is still holding the rest of that mystery, though the scroll of Revelation warns us the spirit of Babylon merely relocated, waiting for a new empire to wear. Same spirit, different era. If you made it to the end of this journey, comment the word watched down below. Subscribe to the channel if you want to keep untangling the strange, forgotten corners of the canonical text, and send this to one person who loves the Old Testament prophets but has never heard the ancient truth about the invisible mountains. The rubble is never just rubble.